secret. And I was talking about how you do not have to be a celebrity to make a difference, to make some change in this world. You can be just who you are. I am so excited that I get my free session right about now. What tools would you have to offer for someone who is dealing with emotional health?
Thank you for that, Judy. Oh my gosh, that really hits my heart.
Mental health is kind of like, don't touch that. It's like taboo.
And then all of a sudden, the person said, no, it's Spa Tracy. And I'm like, oh, they're talking about me.
You ladies are bringing it. I like it. We're going to celebrate. We're going to talk about the things that we're doing and the things that we're going to continue to do to inspire this world. So have a great night, y'all. Thank you for watching. Make it a good day because you can. See you guys soon. Hello. Happy Friday, everybody. How are you guys doing out there? Hello, Facebook. Hello, YouTube. It's so good to be on tonight. Y'all, I have a great show coming up for you. I mean, you're going to love this woman that I have coming up here. She is so skilled at what she does. She's amazing. She's got an incredible heart, and she's absolutely gorgeous. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Sandi Derby. Come on, Sandi.
Hey there. Oh my gosh, it's so good to be here with you, Chantel.
Oh my gosh, it's good to see you. How are you doing?
Wonderful. Great. Busy. It's amazing time. It's a challenging time. So much is going on right now.
It is. Well, I am so glad to have you on this show. Oh my gosh, I have been wanting you to be on this show for a long time. You know that, right?
I do. And I'm so glad I could get to be here.
Awesome. So without further ado, I just want you to jump in and introduce yourself to the people. Tell them a little bit about who you are, what you do, and all that stuff.
Absolutely. So yeah, my name is Sandi Derby, and what I do professionally is I'm a grief recovery specialist. I'm an advanced specialist. I'm also a trainer for the Grief Recovery Institute. I'm a professional development coach, life coach. I do spiritual direction, inner healing, trauma work. So I'm in the healing field for sure. And I get to be with people day in and day out. So that's what I do professionally. Did you want me to share a little bit about how I got here?
As you know what, when we jump in those questions, I want you to lay that on them.
Got it. I will lay it on then. You got it.
Well, thank you just for introducing that part of you. I mean, the work that you do is phenomenal. You know, everything that you just named off. I know that I have experienced the grief recovery that you do. So I'm just grateful that we have people like you out there doing this because it's so needed, which brings me to the topic of our conversation tonight. I titled it Getting to Your Grief. And so I don't know if the audience knows what that means, but the reason I thought of that is because there are people like you who work in this industry. Yeah. And it's so needed, Sandi. Would you agree? It's so needed that we need people who are actually helping people deal with their grief. Yeah. But there's a whole massive amount of people that just refuses to deal with their grief, you know? And so that's kind of why I titled it Getting to Your Grief. So with that, I want to just jump in with the first question. Can you tell us a little bit about what grief recovery is? Like explain it like in detail.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to understand grief recovery, you have to understand grief because I think to your point, so many people don't get to their grief because they don't realize that grief is the issue. Most of the time when I talk to people about grief or I say what I do, they say, oh, you must help a lot of people as they back away from me and say, I know somebody that should talk to you. Because people are afraid of the word. The word grief brings up a lot of fear in people. And most of the time people associate it with either there's been a death or perhaps a divorce. So the first piece is to understand that grief encompasses so many things, so many different losses, like moving, breakups, loss of a pet, drastic changes in our lives, losses in our finances, health, changes with our children when we become empty nesters, grieving experience. When our children change, grieving experience. What we're dealing with now, which we'll talk about in a bit, grieving experiences. So that's the first thing, is we have to understand that loss happens quite frequently. What also happens is that the majority of us are not trained, socialized, or taught what to do when something happens.
True.
You know, John James, who founded Grief Recovery, said, you know, we're taught how to acquire things. We're not taught what to do when we lose them. And so what most of us learn to do is we learn how to stuff, how to minimize, how to put on a smile and keep going. But we don't learn what to actually do when losses happen. And so we end up becoming emotional storage units, and we walk around with a whole inner being full of loss. By the way, it doesn't go anywhere until you process it out. And that affects every area of our life. So I think it's important to understand that. So where grief recovery comes in is grief recovery brings the tools to experientially walk through grief. First, it's like, what have I learned that doesn't help? Then it is, what are ways that I cope instead of grief? Because trust me, if I have unresolved grief, I'm coping in some way. And then what are the things that I have lost? What are the experiences that I've walked through where I've lost something or where a loss has occurred? And then what are the specific steps that I can take to process those losses so that I'm not carrying the undelivered emotional energy inside my body? That's ultimately what we do in Grief Recovery Method. And it's really because we're born grieving. Like babies, little ones, they're in the moment. They feel something, it's up and out. And you're like, okay, yeah, you're in the moment. But we learn to stuff. So what grief recovery does is it brings us back to reteaching what we knew when we were born and what we unlearned because of the society around us and the familial cultures around us.
Wow. I think I got a back here. You hear that?
It's very, I can hardly hear it.
Okay. So I step back a little bit here.
Yeah.
Turn down my mic. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
So one of the things that you said that grief recovery gives tools. And I think that is so needed. You made a point when you say, you know, we're taught to acquire things. We're not taught of what to do with our grief. And I think that's so true, because I don't ever remember someone teaching me how to deal with my grief. Like, okay, when you have a pain, this is what you do with it. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think any of us can relate to having that for ourselves. You know, the subject of grief, you named off quite a few. I wanted to ask you, is there one in particular that you think that is even happening in our world today? You know, we had a lot of stuff going on in the world. Like, if you had to land on one that you could talk about and kind of pick apart for us a little bit, that's kind of even going on today, like a grief that you see that you're like, oh no, this needs some grief recovery tools. What would you say?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think that's a great point, because one of the things that's important to understand about loss is that loss also happens when we have a change or end in a familiar pattern of behavior. So when we go through a drastic change, it's a grieving experience. And obviously the big one that's been happening in our world today is what's happened with COVID, where we've had drastic changes in our day-to-day activities, drastic changes in the way that we socialize and the way that we do business, and drastic changes in the family unit and the way that kids even, you know, had school and still have school. And so all of those things are grieving experiences. The fear of the unknown, not knowing what's going to happen, you know, people that have lost loved ones, there's a lot of division as far as, well, I believe this thing or I believe that thing. Those are all really significant losses because we've lost community, we've lost connection, and you can see the fallout from that because the statistics are pretty staggering. The divorce rate, child abuse, domestic violence, suicide, all of those have escalated across the nation and across the world. And so it's really because we're in a time where we're experiencing a lot of loss. And the other thing that we want to remember about loss is it's cumulative. So if you could think of it this way, imagine you're born and you have a little empty backpack, and then things happen. My bike gets stolen. I'm abused. That's a huge loss. You know, we move, grandma dies. And imagine that every time, because what's being modeled, I stuff it. A rock, pebble, or boulder goes in that backpack. So as time goes on, I'm acquiring more and more. Then we get to COVID. Now everything's changed. People are in flux. People are in fear. It's an incredible loss of security and safety and control and connection. And then you put a big boulder on top of an already heavy backpack. And that's why you're seeing the kinds of things that you're seeing right now with divorce rates and suicide rates and all that, because there's such a tremendous loss that everybody's experiencing on some level or another right now.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, Sandi. You know, I can totally relate to what you're talking about because I lost community too. Like it's been like, I think you've lost it. We've all lost it. And so what has happened is a lot of people don't really know what to do with that, like the loss of their community, the loss of their jobs, their loss of, and some of us have lost people. I've lost people in with COVID, you know. And so I appreciate you talking about that, because I don't think that a lot of people look at this as grief. I think some people look at it, oh, it's our government. It's the reason why we're in this. Or, you know, they're trying to find somewhere to place it almost. And versus really acknowledging what is actually happening in their own space, my own life. Like, oh my gosh, I just lost my job. Oh my gosh, I lost my house. Oh my gosh, I lost my car. You know, there are a lot of different things for me this year that happened that I'm like, that's a grief, you know. But before knowing about something like grief recovery, I would have never even considered them being a grief. I would have looked at society or the different things that are coming my way. That's the reason. This person, that's the reason. You know, so, I appreciate you just really breaking that down for us like that. You know, when we're talking about this area of grief, could you share with us, like, has there been anything for you, like on your journey, where you found something very painful that you realized this is grief, and you know, how did you deal with it?
Yeah.
And was it even before? I mean, even sure if you could share a little bit, whether it was before the knowledge you've learned or even after, it's up to you. But I'd love to hear how you've had a painful experience. So I think it'll help our audience to really get an example of what it looks like in real time.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I've had several, but I would say some of the real big ones for me is I grew up in a very abusive home. So there was physical, verbal, and sexual abuse throughout my entire childhood. And I stuffed that all down, kept going, because that's what we did. I grew up in a very much a denial home, right? So it was an abusive home and a denial home. And I took the denial and I just ran with it. And that led me to dark places, and it led me to drug addiction. I was a meth addict for 3.5 years and all that kind of stuff. I left meth and I stopped using, which was great, but my heart was still broken. And I did therapy, which really helped me to kind of put pieces together and intellectually process what had happened. But the word and the verbiage that I had always gotten for what I had gone through was, it's trauma. You've been through these traumatic experiences, and they were traumatic.
Yeah.
But what helped me the most is when I realized that these were grieving experiences. I had lost so much as a child. My purity, my innocence, love, connection, security, safety. I often say in my story, the denial for me was just as big a loss as the abuse, because it didn't give me anywhere to put it. Now it was a loss of the truth. And so how do you deal with something when it's not even being presented as the truth? So all of those things were tremendous losses. And I can't even tell you the freedom that I experienced when I was able to walk through the grief that I experienced as a child, the amount of being set free to actually grieve what was lost, identify it and grieve it, was life-changing for me. Because even with all of the other things that I had done, what I had not done was engaged my heart. And grief is emotional. It's not intellectual. You cannot think your way into feeling better. Grief is the process through which a loss experience is transformed. It's a transformative experience. Grief transforms loss into purpose, into character, into identity. It does all of those things. And that's why it's such an important piece. And so for me, it was life-changing to be able to go, oh my goodness, I need to grieve. You know, grief is about looking back and going, there are things I wish were better, different, or more. And I was able to look at my childhood and go, there's so much that I wish was better or different or more. So it really was a game changer for me.
Thank you. Wow. I really you putting yourself out there for this. You sharing your journey and how basically your childhood, the loss that you had because of the denial, because of the actual experience of what happened to you. You know, my heart, you know, breaks is I'm feeling the tenderness of your story, and I appreciate you just being vulnerable to share that. So thank you so much. I think our audience is getting, this is the real time, you guys. This is the real stuff, the real nitty grit. So thank you for that. You mentioned stuffing. I can't tell you how many times in my life I stuffed stuff. And I think, you know, I don't know if men can relate to this, and maybe they can, but I know that the women that I grew up around and the women that are in my life, even now, you know, it's easy for us to stuff things. It's easy for us to get busy. It's easy for us to gloss over pain. Oh, you know, I'm not supposed to. That's one thing I hear. I heard. I'm not supposed to be dealing that. You know, that I got to keep moving on. You know, God's got this, and I'm going to be all right. And those are really great responses. You know what I'm saying? But if the response doesn't match what's going on inside of you, it's probably something that you need to take care of. Like it's a grieving situation.
Yes.
You know, you made a good point about, you know, just basically figuring out how to move through things by actually dealing with them. And it sounds like you did the work.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell you too, if I didn't know some of that stuff about you, because I knew some of it, but even if I did not know, you do not carry yourself like a woman who has all these things that have happened to her. You know what I'm saying? I think that's another thing when you don't deal with grief, is that it carries on in your body. It carries on in your attitude, the way you treat people, the way you react to people rather than responding to them. I mean, it's a full circle thing. And so I thank you for just really walking us through it so that we can understand it a little bit more, like what is actually really grief and what is not. With that said, I want to ask you covered it a little bit, but why do you personally think that it's so crucial for people to address their grievances? Like, why do you think?
I love that question. I think it's crucial. I think it's critical. And I think it's one of the parts of our society that is very overlooked. And I kind of mentioned it before, but grief is a transformative process. It takes our painful experiences and transforms them, right? We're transformed through grieving. We're not transformed through stuffing. Stuffing is not transformative. But when you walk through the grieving process, you get to another side, and that becomes transformative. Now, I'm not carrying pain. And there's something very profound about that. You know, and I've had people say to me, wow, you say grief recovery. How can you have recovery from grief? I'll never recover from what happened to me, right? Like if you look at my story even, or, you know, when somebody has lost a child and all those kind of things. And I always tell them, you know, there's a big difference between pain and sadness. Mm-hmm. I can still be sad over what happened to me as a child. I am sad at times. I would never want that to happen to any child, including myself. However, I don't carry the pain anymore. And that's the difference. And that's what happens. And to your point, when we carry a lot of unresolved grief, there's a lot of ways that we can show up. Depressed, anxious, out of the moment, fearful, distrustful, overreactive, angry, prickly, isolative, or we have repetitive behavior patterns that we're trying to get out of and we just can't seem to do it. And so there's prices that we pay for that unresolved grief. And sometimes they're even financial, because unresolved grief can even block me making money and all of those other pieces of my life. It can block relationships, because if there's things stuffed in my heart, then I'm going to be divided, from the very things that are important to me. So grieving is an extremely important piece. And yet I think it's often the most neglected and the most misunderstood, and so because of that, I think, to your point, as we're in this COVID season, I remember when it was all first happening, remember there was like the run on like food and toilet paper and all that kind of thing. And I remember I went to the grocery store and I bought eggs. I eat a lot of eggs. I eat a lot. Okay. So I eat a lot of eggs, and I bought like 3 dozen, and I was checking out at self-checkout, and the guy that was working at the grocery store like really yelled at me, like, didn't you see the sign? You're only supposed to take 2. And I was like, I can put 1 back. He's like, you already rang it up. And I was like, okay. But I remember in that moment, because he was usually such a cheerful person. And I remember just thinking, this is the tension that we're in right now. This is what not knowing what's going on in my heart and having that unresolved grief with COVID on top, this is what it does. This is what it produces. So I was able to not take the egg thing personally, but I think it's a small example of things that can happen and build up if we don't engage our heart. Your purpose flows from your heart. Your identity flows from your heart. If your heart's all stopped up, your identity, your purpose, your present moment passion is blocked. So it's worth it. It's really worth it.
That's good stuff, girl. Really good stuff. It blocks your heart, your passion and your purpose. That stuff gets cut off and stifled. That's what I'm hearing you say. You also, when you talked about there's a process of transformation. I love that word, because I think that we all want to be growing and getting better, right? Everybody, I can't think of anyone's like, I don't really care about growing. I don't want to get better. I don't want to become anything. I don't think there's a person on the face of the planet that really wants that for themselves. I mean, they may talk that way, but I don't think they really want it for themselves. But when you talk about how grief is transformative and that we actually have to go through it in order to see the results of transformation, that's pretty powerful. And I don't think that a lot of people understand that. So just you breaking that down is really helpful, I think, for just even some of the people that are watching. You also mentioned something earlier. I can't quite remember the quote, but it was to the point of, like trying to make yourself feel better in your head versus actually walking through it. I think that's another concept of saying the right thing, but not actually feeling it. There's something with that. And so it sounds like what you're sharing, you just gave us kind of like some indicators too, of really to be on point with what grief is and what is actually happening within us. When people are not resolved, like you were talking about with the guy with the eggs, I love that example, because obviously he had some going on for him too. He's got to work at a job and he's got to tell people, you can't get more than two dozen. Can you imagine saying that to like hundreds of people that come through the store that day? I'm just like, that's overwhelming. I thank you for really expressing this, because it helps me to be aware that when people are doing a certain thing or yelling, that comes from somewhere.
It does.
It comes from somewhere. It has nothing to do with me, or even when I'm going off or if I'm yelling, that's coming from somewhere. And so that's really key. And I think you just gave us something that for us to really just zoom in on. So thank you for that, Sandi. There's some comments over here. I want to read a few of them if you don't mind. Yes, let's read some of this. They say, hi, Sandi. Such a great topic for this time in many lives. Good stuff. Babies release their frustration in the moment. Sandi is so good at what she does. The tools are key. Loss is cumulative. Sandy's so great to hear from you. Sandy, thank you for acknowledging our losses. We don't even realize the grief we are living in. Facing what is going on in your own space is so important. It is sadly very easy for me as a man to stuff my emotions rather than actually dealing with them. It is much more difficult to be authentic and vulnerable regarding my feelings. Sandy, help my heart to flow again. Your present moment is blocked if your heart is stuffed and undealt with. They loving your points, girl. You can focus on your points. You can't think your way to feeling better. That was it. That was it. That was it. And good stuff, ladies. That was the last one. But yes, oh my gosh, your points are just landing on people's hearts. And I think that's what this is all about. If we could have a conversation and it's going to move beyond this screen into people's hearts. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to talk about this topic when you're thinking about grief, and some of it you've actually talked about, like, some people don't actually really know it's actually grief.
Yeah.
But what do you think hinders people from dealing with their grief? Like, what stops them in their tracks and just like, I'm not doing it?
I love that question. And I think some of the answers really some of the societal messaging that we're inundated with day in and day out. I feel like there's these kind of myths or lies in our society, and they say one of two things. It's either if you open this door to your pain, it's like opening Pandora's box and you will never get out of it. And you're going to be wallowing in misery for the rest of your life. So just don't open the box. Because if you do, you'll never get out of it. So just go be happy. Just do whatever it takes to be happy. Right. And then the contrast of that is you can't ever get over this. And so just accept and embrace this kind of less than life that says you're going to be in this pain and misery, and embrace that and know it'll never get better. Right. And I think one of the other messages that's out there that's very dangerous is just this idea of time and time healing, and that it just like time heals all wounds. Right. That's another message. And it's kind of like if you just wait it out, you're going to feel better. And the reality is that none of those things are true. Time in and of itself is not a healer. If I take action within time, absolutely. But if I just wait it out, it'd be like me driving a car and getting a flat tire and then sitting in a chair just waiting for air to get in my tire. It will never happen, But what grief recovery does is it gives us these tools where we face, embrace, and release pain. But we're taught all of these things about pain. We're taught that, you can't handle it, you're going to wallow in it, or just be happy, or just wait it out. And I believe because of that, people become very afraid to engage in a process by which they are opening the door to the things of pain. But one of the things that I always say, and it's a quote that somebody said to me years ago, is your past is your present until it's healed. And so you're going to carry that forward, whether you're not thinking about it, trying to be happy, it's still with you. If you're going to just wait it out, it's still with you. At the same time, if you've had a devastating loss, my heart breaks for you, but know that there is a way to live in the present without all the pain. And that's what grieving does. But there's so many misconceptions about it that it kind of becomes this topic that people are very afraid of.
Yeah. Ooh, that, you talked about the past being our present until we deal with it. It's so true. I mean, I can tell you for sure that when I did not deal with the stuff that was going on with me, it showed up everywhere I went. I mean, everywhere. It was at the grocery store with me. It was at my friend's house with me. It was in every relationship. And that's the other thing too. It carries over into all these different relationships, no matter who they are. It could be your boyfriend, your husband, your friend, your sister, girlfriend. It just shows up everywhere you go until it's actually dealt with it. So I appreciate that. the myths that you talked about, the messaging, myths and messaging. I think that's a subject matter in itself. Myths and messaging. You
So
can do that, Sandy. But yeah, these myths, these misconceptions of what is and what not, you probably can't. They're so wrong, and it's really sad that our society is inundated with that, and some people unfortunately receive it for themselves.
Yep.
The space of creating this narrative to in people's mindsets, and they rehearse that for themselves. Some of that stuff too is from growing up as well. You know, some
Yes.
people grew up with all this kind of messaging, and so as they're in their adult lives now, they're still hearing it, so they go, oh, it must be true because I heard this when I was younger too. And so I am grateful that you're like going put in an X on that. Like that's not that's not the way to go. To really, when you talked about earlier these signs and these tools that you guys do in grief recovery, this is something that people can start looking at to go, no, I won't listen to that anymore. I'm going to figure out a different way, because so far it hasn't worked out for me with what I am doing with my pain. That's I'm so grateful that you mentioned that. Someone said, awesome conversation and great information. I have stuff pain in my heart many times because I just didn't want to deal with it. Yes, that's what you talked about, Sandy.
Yeah.
People just don't want to deal with it. I think also too, like there's a fear too with dealing with it because they don't know the outcome. I think there's a group of people that are like, if I tap into this, and you kind of mentioned it, opening Pandora's box, if I open that, like what comes out of that, I don't know if I'm ready for it. I don't know if I can handle that. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of that. And I think a lot of people feel like that too. But as Sandy is saying, you guys on Facebook and YouTube, there is a way. There is always a way. God always provides a way. He doesn't say, oh, you just stay in your pain. He always provides a way. And so I believe in grief recovery. I don't know, I'm not here trying to sell you guys anything, but I'm just telling you my personal experience. I believe in it because it gave me some tools that at least look deeper to where I needed to go. So after I did grief recovery, I actually ended up going to therapy because I knew I needed some extra. And so sometimes that happens, and I think we can't be afraid to actually go the distance, go all the way. Can you give us a little bit more, like some more practical steps that you can share that may be helpful regarding this topic? Like if you could, I know you gave some, but if you could give some more steps regarding this topic of what a person can do, say if a person is not ready to go to grief recovery, or if a person is saying, considering grief recovery, what are some steps that they can take right now?
Absolutely. I mean, there's like on my website, for example, which is griefunchained.com, there's some free resources on there. There's a resources tab, and there's all of these downloadable ebooks that talk more deeply about some of the things that I've been talking about. You know, go on griefrecoverymethod.com, and there's videos and, you know, other resources to at least get that started. The other piece of it too is grief is it's really about sharing. It's really about having safe community and sharing. And I'll be honest, even when I work with somebody who's walking through, let's say, grief recovery method, I really encourage them to find safe community. I don't anticipate that they're going to get all of their community needs met in a one-on-one session with me. I think that's the other piece, is that we have to understand that we need safe people in our lives. And a safe person is somebody that I can say, hey, you know what? I just need to share about this painful thing. Can you just listen? I don't need to be fixed right now, but can you just hear me? You know, there's a lot in the sharing. I think there's a lot in just even acknowledging, writing it down, being aware. Those are all really, really great steps. Understand that your grief is not going to just go away on its own. Just that awareness alone is huge. Write things down that have hurt you. Talk to somebody. Look at some of the free resources. They'll get deeper into things like myths, and they'll give you really great language for some of the things that may be happening in your heart. And Chantel, you made a really great point about therapy, and which is awesome, because therapy is amazing. You know, any of these tools are amazing. What grief recovery is specific to is the heart. So it's very specific. It has almost a very narrow lane, even though it encompasses a wide variety of things and meets a lot of people. It's heart language. And what I find even is that therapy a lot of times goes a lot better once somebody's done grief recovery. Because once you've walked through the grieving part, therapy increases exponentially. And one other quick point I want to share, because I feel like it's the Holy Spirit nudging me to, it might help somebody out there, is that one of the other things about unresolved grief, like one of the reasons why it's important to deal with it, is Chantel kind of alluded to this earlier. When you have a lot of things stuffed inside, that's emotional energy in the body. It also makes you physically sick. So I cannot tell you how many times I have worked with someone who's been presenting with some kind of physical ailment that won't go away, that when they walk through the grieving process actually does. Because that emotions are meant to be expressed, not stuffed. And when things are stuffed inside, that becomes toxic, physically toxic. So I just wanted to make that point too. So even getting that moment with a safe person to have a conversation is very, very helpful.
Oh, thank you, Sandi. Oh my gosh. I definitely can relate to what you just shared. Just basically not moving forward because I hadn't dealt with it. Like there was so much in my life before. And I appreciate you talking about the therapy aspect, because I think before I was afraid to actually go to therapy. That was something I did not want to do.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until like I had safe people in my life. You mentioned that. That's the community, the safe people that you can talk to about things. And I remember a girl telling me, with what you're sharing about the physical aspect. I had a friend, she told me, because I kept talking about this one thing that I kept being sick, and she said, I was like that before until I just went to therapy. And so I'm like, don't even try it. Don't even try it. But I knew with the Holy Spirit was leading me there, because why would she tell me that? I hadn't hung out with her in ages too. And it just came up in the conversation. So I knew God was speaking to me.
Absolutely.
But I think you're absolutely right that you have to have that community of safe people, and you have to be open also to go, I'm going to work on me. That's another thing. Like, people need to always see that they always have opportunities to work on themselves.
Yes.
And we don't want to take the steps to heal ourselves. You mentioned it so profoundly that we just kind of stay stuck, and we live in that past and not able to really tap into the presence. So, girl, you have definitely really served us tonight. And I really appreciate you taking the time to just break this down a little bit more for us. I love that you said grief recovery is about heart. That is pretty cool. And we all want our hearts beating, y'all, right? We want them beating right?
Absolutely.
Is there any we're at our time, but I wanted to ask you, are there any last words, any kind of advice you would leave? I also want you to leave people. I know you left the grief recovery information, but I would love for them, if anybody wants to connect with you beyond this, for you to leave your information as well. So can you share any other last words you may have?
Absolutely. I think, the whole conversation has been amazing. So thank you. I love that you're talking about this, because I feel like it's a missing piece.
Yeah.
But, what I would leave people with is, we're all born, right, with these, like, we have unique heartbeats. We have a unique fingerprint. Like, there's obviously an imprint that each of us are supposed to leave and have here in this world. And when you are carrying a lot of pain in your heart, your ability to leave that imprint gets really hindered. And yet at the same time, when your heart is addressed, and when you've addressed your heart, there's something about passion and purpose that gets reconnected and invigorated. And so I would just, say to anybody out there, you're worth it, and your heart is worth it, and you're worth it. And know that I've walked with people through really deep things. I've walked in with my own deep griefs and my own deep pains. And I can tell you there's another side, and for somebody out there that's feeling like, almost like there can be a hopelessness. I get a lot of people that come to me like, I've tried everything and it just hasn't worked. Because if it's grief and you're trying other things, it won't work. Know that, look within, look at your heart, is there things that you've been through that are painful experiences, even if you've processed them intellectually? What is your heart speaking to you? Because if your heart is in pain, there is a way to get beyond the pain.
Thank you, Sandi.
Yeah.
I thank you for that. I wanted to ask you this. This just came up for me.
Sure.
What are your thoughts, like really quickly, like if someone is saying, hey, I'm over that, I'm done, I'm not bothered, but you see it, everybody else sees that, no, there's something's not quite right.
Yeah.
How do you, what are your thoughts on that? Like, would you say that that person possibly has some grief that may be unresolved? Like, what are your thoughts regarding something like that?
Most definitely. I'd say they probably do. I feel like I see that one a lot. And again, I think it goes back to the society we live in. We're very intellectually versed. So we do a lot of analyzing, discovering, we process things very intellectually. So I might have identified what happened. I might have identified that it bothered me and hurt me. I might have identified that. I might have even said, I forgive the person. Like I might have even gone that far. And that's great. And I love actually working with people that have gone that far. But that doesn't mean that doing that got the rocks, pebbles, and boulders out of your backpack.
Woo!
Forgiveness is layered, and head language is different than heart language. So I could be saying, I'm over it, I'm good. But my heart, and that's probably, like you said, what we all see on the outside, but your heart is saying something very, very different because of the way that you're showing up. A lot of times these are people that might have maybe an emotional outburst, or they have a lot of fears, or they seem to be doing the same things over and over again, but they're like, no, I'm good, I'm good. And a lot of times it's the grief issue that's really holding them up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, thank you for that. Thank you for bringing that backpack, because I wanted to talk to you about that. You just brought that back. Thank you so much for that. Yeah. That backpack analogy is, I have that visual in my mind. And so I will be taking that one, girl.
Yeah.
Honey, I don't know if you've already taught a masterclass on this, but this topic right here, I think more people need to hear what you just shared, because it's huge. It's huge, and it'll give us as a people some ways to deal with the stuff that's going on versus putting all of our emotions on Facebook or Instagram, or saying all these different things. You could see it in people's writings that they're hurting, but there is a place to deal with your hurt. And I think that's what you just gave us tonight. There's a way to deal with your hurt. Yes. So thank you. I really appreciate you being on here, girl. And like I said, I don't know if you have yet, but that master class, if you haven't started it, get it percolating.
I will do that.
It's so needed. It's so needed. Yeah. You guys, that's our time. Thank you all for your comments. I really appreciate you all watching on YouTube as well as Facebook. Thank you, Sandi, for what you shared. And I didn't. Can you drop your information real quick before we close out? Because I didn't hear you say where people can reach you. Because I know some people might want to get in touch with you, girl.
Do you want me to put it in the comments, or do you want me to just share it?
You go ahead and say it. John, thank you. My husband's on here actually putting stuff in the comments. So just go ahead and say it, and he'll grab it.
The best way is just to go to my website. It's griefunchained.com, or Sandi Derby, SandiDerby.com. There's all my contact information, resources, everything is there.
Great. Wonderful. Someone said, thank you, Sandi. And people always have opportunities to work on themselves. And then this last one comment I want to share is sometimes when you lose someone you love by death or breakup, you just want to keep moving so you don't have to think about your grief of the grief of losing them. So true. Exactly what we were talking about. So thank you guys for your comments. And remember, y'all out there, make it a good day because y'all know y'all can. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much, Sandi. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye, sweetheart.
Bye-bye.